The murder of George Floyd in 2020 and the upheaval of the COVID-19 pandemic ignited a national conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. These events expose the glaring inequities people of color face daily, inequities that often have life-altering consequences. In those early days, I was filled with hope about the possibilities for change, while some friends and colleagues were more skeptical. They warned that DEI efforts might only be a passing trend, a temporary fix, or the flavor of the month. Now, just a few years later, we're seeing a backlash. Critics argue that DEI programs attempt to address racial discrimination by disadvantaging other groups, fueling intense debate and controversy. On this episode of Brooklyn Savvy, we'll unpack the state of DEI, where it's been, where it's going, and what it truly means for social justice. Stay tuned for a thought-provoking conversation. I wanted to create a safe space to have uncomfortable yet transformative conversations that move people, amplifying the voices of those who are underrepresented and who inspire positive change. I'm Toni Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy. Welcome to this episode on DEI, Brooklyn and beyond. So now I'm going to pitch something out to my panelistas. This is a question for each of you to answer. Do marginalized groups still need DEI? Have we progressed beyond that? Lisa, I'm going to start with you.
I think it's a different question. I think the question is, and I come from a business and organizational perspective lens.
She's already changing my question, but that's all right.
Go ahead. Well, I think the premise is important. And I think the question is, do we need talent in our organizations? And the answer is yes. And then the next question is, do we need to leave out a whole segment of talent in order to focus on one segment? And the answer is no. The term has been co-opted, just like this term woke, right, has been co-opted. And I think we need to rethink how we approach. Do we need diversity in the workplace? Absolutely. Of, race, culture, age, etc. Look, we've got diversity in the workplace, whether you want it or not. We've got 4 or 5 generations in the workplace. So let's just look at it from that lens. The question is, how do we harness our talent? How do we recognize talent? And how do we grow the talent? Just very quickly, when I was at Prudential, Prudential was one of the pioneers in the early 90s. And I was brought in on the project, and I said, we don't have a diversity problem, we have a management problem. And I ended up creating a 6-part workshop series that went on that was very successful, that started to reframe, and also it brought in everybody, and the relationship started to shift. So I think that we need to rethink how we think about diversity or DEI, and we need new approaches.
Appreciate
Thank
the
you.
points.
Thank you.
So I'm going to give it to you this way. So I'm going to, Harriet Tubman didn't have DEI. Sojourner Truth didn't have DEI. Shirley Chisholm did not have DEI.
Madam C.J. Walker.
The list goes on and on and on. So do marginalized groups, individuals, people, and communities need DEI? No. Does society need DEI? Yes.
Excellent. Yes.
Individuals who've been marginalized, they don't need DEI, but they need to live in a society. They need to live and work in structures, institutions, systems that support, encourage, appreciate the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Absolutely. Christine, yes, yes, I love that.
All your points, I agree with. So I agree we don't need it. I do agree that this country needs it. The facts and the stats will still show that we have a long way to go. We still do not have enough representation of our voices in key leadership positions and decisions that are being made at the C-suite. So there's still a lot of work that is needed for society to get us there.
Portia Allen-Kyle, Interim Executive Director of Color of Change, what do you say?
I definitely agree. I mean, we Black people aren't locking ourselves out of opportunity and out of systems, right?
Absolutely.
And so it's, not necessarily about, what do Black people need as individuals to get ahead. We're not lacking in anything. We have all we need. Do system structures, corporations, decision makers need something that forces them to open up opportunities and, shift systems, shift incentives, and really share in opportunities that have been hoarded for generations? Absolutely. And so that is why it's, even beyond DEI, it's why it's important to make sure that we are protecting the civil rights progress that we have made and the accountability and the enforcement mechanisms that are in existence to make sure that opportunities are open and people are not systematically excluded and blocked.
So why do you think this is polarizing?
There's a long history in this country of people just not wanting Black people, right? And full stop with a period at the end of the sentence. We're in a moment right now where it's not even, the right-wing attacks are not even just trying to send us back to Jim Crow. During Jim Crow, we were able to have institutions and do things for ourselves as Black people. We had Black schools, Black businesses, Black banks, right? And right now in this environment, they are attacking us, and the Fearless Fund fight, for example, is about us trying to help ourselves in this moment, and that is coming under attack. And so that's not necessarily what we experienced in Jim Crow. That's something else, right? That's sending us even further back to a system of exclusion where they are really trying to rid us from opportunity, from society in many different ways. And that is why the fight to hold corporations accountable, to make sure that government is protecting all of us and protecting all of our rights is even more important in this moment.
If I can add there, I think that we have reached this moment at this particular point in society, in the maturation of this nation, because we're seeing the shift. The plates are shifting, right? So when we, for so long had heard about the majority becoming the minority becoming the majority. When you have politics where you see more people being elected, people of color being elected, when you have more people of color becoming part of the electorate, the bottom line political and economic power bases are threatened. They were going along even begrudgingly with DEI for some time, with affirmative action. But wait a minute. Now we're getting to a point where people, if the minority becomes the majority, then they have more political power when it comes to voting power. They may have more economic power if they're sitting in certain positions. This is going a little too far. And then let's add to it, as the country, and this whole experiment around who shall have and who shall not, as we have more DEI, and you have more and more people, on one hand, of color, making their way to middle class and upper middle class, but at the same time, you have more white Americans who have always been in the majority having less, but not proportionately so. But as they're beginning to wonder, why the heck can I not work a full-time job, pay all of my bills, save for tomorrow, save for my children's future, then you start getting into the othering, which this nation has done from the jump. So I'm not going to look at the system, I'm going to other. I'm going to look at, now the blacks are getting they're moving from the black jobs, they're taking my jobs. That's not really what's at play.
Yeah.
But now I've got to have somebody to be angry with, because I've never been taught to think critically about how the system itself is keeping me down.
And I've got to have somebody to blame. And I think also DEI is a very broad term, right? And I think, even in the conversation so far, we're talking government, we're talking politics, we're talking, the workplace, we're talking education and economics. And I think we need to look at different spaces. So, there's the systemic issue that and there's work to be done there. And we need people who have the critical skills, the critical thinking skills, and the ability to galvanize people to deal with that. And then there's on the ground. You know, I work one-on-one and in small groups with people in organizations, in leadership positions. I see
you're
the
granular.
construction. So I think also we need to acknowledge that there are different layers, and there are different layers where the work needs to be done and needs to be done differently.
The difference between equity and equality. What do you say to that, Portia?
You know, equality is what, you know, for so long was the focus. And really, I guess I will say this first, that people tend to be okay with uneven outcomes so long as they believe that there is some opportunity to get to wherever it is people are trying to go. And, you know, that mindset and that framework has really, you know, been one of equality, where it's, okay, I have something, you have something, we can both do something and get, you know, to the place. The pushback against equity is that, like, critical interrogation as to whether the something I have and the something you have to access the opportunity is what we actually need to do so, right? Like, in a way that can get us to the outcome. And, you know, there's this graphic that was circulating after, you know, around 2020 in the summer that, you know, illustrates the difference, right? And it's, you know, 3 kids trying to look over a fence, and, you know, one, you know, was very short and needed 1 box, right? The other, like, really needed 2 boxes. You know, equality is the giving everybody the same thing. Equity, and why folks have been pushing so hard for it as the driver and as a strategy to equality of outcomes. You know, equality and equity are sisters, not twins, or cousins, I'm sorry, not twins. And, like, you need equity as a strategy to get to the place where the playing field is level. We can't start assuming that everybody just needs the same thing and we'll get there. And, like, that is, I think, what drives a lot of the backlash. Many folks don't want outcomes to actually be equal.
No, they don't.
You know, when you talk about equity and equality, I think of equal opportunity. Do I have an opportunity to go for this job as the same as someone else? I need to be educated to know what the systems are, what the game is that I'm playing, and I also need to be willing to advocate on my behalf.
I was just going to add that, just, you know, picking up on your point, take public school in America. Take public school in Brooklyn, New York. So the state of New York says that every child, you know, gets the same per pupil allocation. Well, let's say the per pupil allocation is $20,000. So in that more affluent community, you've got the $20,000 coming from the state by way of education dollars. You've got a child in a less affluent and impoverished school, same $20,000. But the Parent-Teacher Association in the more affluent school can raise
$2 million.
$2 million, right? In the less affluent, impoverished school, the PTA is raising $500. The point I'm making is equality is every child
Gets $20,000.
is getting $20,000 from the government. Everything looks equal. Fairness would be, no, I'm sorry, in affluent school community, you cannot raise $2 million and put it in the classroom and give children greater learning experiences. That's the problem with equity.
I don't think it's very complicated in understanding the difference between equity and equality. I think that it's just more of a refusal for people to accept the equity discussion. I remember I was listening to something that Trevor Noah had on his program about this equality and equity. It's in the golf game. When you look at golfing
handicaps.
You know,
Yes,
we
yes,
are more
there it
willing
is.
to accept it in a game that way. So if a player comes and they have a handicap that is much higher, it allows them the privilege to take more chances at getting.
Or women playing on the Reds. I play golf.
See, okay,
Women playing
see?
the Reds, right?
So you understand that philosophy when it comes to equity, but it's difficult when we're starting to talk about wealth, when we're starting to talk about education. So I think it's more of a willingness, because we can solve this. It's just we have to get to the point of accepting that there is inequity.
And if I can just add, I think part of what the challenge is not necessarily with, you know, the terms, the problem, or anything else, but, you know, to the example of schools, like when you're talking about solutions, part of the solution is redistribution. And, like, that is where, right? This idea that people have that you're going to take what I have, forget what you had is completely unearned and like undeserved and, mostly built of privilege and happenstance. But the idea that, someone previously had something and now it's going to someone else, or, now someone else needs to be at the table, is, when you lay that on with just our racialized history here, in the US, like it does fuel a lot of resentment and backlash and, all of the things. Doesn't mean we should, bend a knee to these, feelings prematurely or otherwise.
Doesn't it speak to a complete rethinking? I mean, you bring up the education system. My understanding is that New York City education system is one of the most segregated in the country. Shouldn't we be rethinking, which to me speaks to the leadership that we need in order to reimagine the way things work? Look, we're talking about driverless cars. We're talking about drones, right? They're rethinking how we get our packages. Why can't we rethink how we do education? Why can't we rethink how we do a lot of other?
And are there laws that are serving as a barrier for us to think that
policies.
creatively?
You want to speak to that, Jennifer?
I was
Well,
just
the
going to
policies get changed.
would it be that simple? It is because at the end of the day, what holds up all of this is intentional, willful structural economic deprivation. It's all about economics and politics, or I should say economics and power in the form of politics and money.
And wealth,
right?
yeah.
And bottom line wealth, yes.
right, yeah.
Right, but that's what it's been from the beginning. And so when you begin to challenge these systems, the stronghold is, no, the system's got to stay in place because the system is working for those who created it.
We see that now.
And for those who look like those who created it, they are disillusioned to believe they are part of that system, even when that system is actually
benefiting
working
them.
against
Yeah.
the great majority of them.
So then how do you propose that things shift? I mean, we can sit here and talk about and identify.
Right. I want to focus in on the fact that America is losing its way, because there are so many benefits that we derive from diversity, equity, inclusion. It's called productivity. It's called innovation. It's called different points of view. Can you speak to that?
What the data does show is that everybody is better when,
It
Black
impacts
people
the
do
bottom
better.
line. You make
Yeah.
more
Yes,
money.
that's right, that's right.
And the bottom line, even beyond money, right? No matter what the realm is, like when things are more inclusive, when things are more equitable, everybody is better. The like old saying, a rising tide lifts all boats is real in this sense. And what the data doesn't show is that by making everybody better, some people are discriminated against and worse off, right? And so we have to, kind of parse through when we're thinking about, benefits and thinking about, who has what to gain. We all gain. And thinking of, who, has something to lose. Actually, nobody loses. Like we all are gaining by being more inclusive. As we move back in, as folks are with this neo-segregationist agenda that they're trying to push forward or trying to, send us backwards, then we are all losing. And there are some clear decisions and choices that folks need to make in terms of what is acceptable. It shouldn't be acceptable. There should be consequences for corporations to announce, not just move silently away from commitments, but to make press releases, and put out public statements and go on a media blitz around, they're moving away from commitments that they profited off of in many ways, like post, Floyd, right? And right now we're in a place where, we have a lot of work to do in terms of building power and maintaining those benefits.
If they're not going to message, how do we communicate this? Because it's not going to come from the...
That's right.
It's not going to
From the
come from
establishment.
outside of
That's right.
ourselves. So how do we advocate? How do we have the messages that talk about how perfect
the
this
scary
is?
thing is that this is becoming all the
I
more
say perfect?
challenging to do. When you appreciate
right.
that Meta
Meta.
has now shut down DEI, right?
Owner of Facebook.
The owner of
And didn't
Facebook and
Walmart do
Instagram.
it too as well?
and Walmart.
Yeah.
Right, but let's just stay here for a minute. So how are people getting their information and how are people communicating most broadly these days? It's with Meta. So how are you going to speak up and out against companies that are, that have shut down DEI when the company, where the platform on which you do it and get the greatest play has shut it down.
I put it on, I post it, meaning there's, I still
But where are you
work on
posting?
it. I put it right there on Facebook. Yes.
But what I'm saying is Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook
Right.
are ending DEI. You are actually supporting a platform.
Oh, no, I get that too. We're trapped.
Right, but that's my point.
Yeah, we're trapped.
So we're caught up now. Monopolies were to be a thing of the past.
You're trapped.
We're now back at that, where we are actually feeding the beast.
To me, that's more disconcerting with Meta. Isn't so much the DEI, it is concerning. I think that we'll still have an opportunity to post our views. I don't think we're going to see that being shut down. The challenge is now, and we were talking about this a little bit, is where to get accurate information, right? So, because I think, you can post different viewpoints, but for the average person, everything, you just don't know what's true anymore. And the fact that Meta now has fired all their fact checkers, where does that leave society? As far
the
as
other thing is, so whom are you posting though? Because your message isn't going to carry beyond it's like preaching to the choir.
I think the conversation and the focus on like Meta's actions as a free speech issue are both important and aside the point in so many ways, like in such a distraction. I mean, like the reality is that the like moving away from the bare minimum that they were doing in the first place leaves Black people online in digital spaces at risk and sometimes with real world consequences. So some of the protections that they put in place and the content moderation, et cetera, was because it became, there's so much, and you see it on X, as like just being a vile cesspool of hatred and bigotry and misogyny and all of the things. It was Facebook who, when Kyle Rittenhouse, who had gunned down the protesters in the street, were fighting about taking down a video and taking down this man's content and all of the other things, and then felt vindicated when he was acquitted. When we know why white men get acquitted of vile acts that put people in real harm. And so, it's not just that, free speech, they're not the government. Like, free speech in the First Amendment is about government censoring speech. And we need to stop putting these corporations and giving them the cover of government actors when they are not. They are people out for the dollar. They, will go whichever way. And I think we've, seen this with Meta. We'll go whichever way the wind blows the dollar and follow, along. And it'll be us and our families and our, who are going to pay the price, both either in life, as hatred and people continue to be indoctrinated, online through these platforms with no consequences, no repercussions, nothing. And without, really taking stock of that. And that to me is what's at play here.
So two things. One, I'm reminded of the bus boycott. Are Black people willing to boycott?
See, that's
okay.
that's
just a question.
I want to talk to you about Color of Change. How does your organization play into this? Meaning, what is it that you do? What are the outcomes that you seek? What are your programs?
Color of Change is a national civil rights, racial justice organization powered by millions of members across the country. We are the only national civil rights, Black founded, Black led, that doesn't take corporate money. And so we do quite a bit of corporate accountability work. And so, you just mentioned a moment ago, thinking about, Black people boycotting. And for us, it's okay. And, how are we thinking about creating consequences for, these corporations and their actions where other institutions are also holding them accountable? So, in this context, it's not just the users of Facebook, for example, but how are we thinking about, JP Morgan holds significant shares of, Facebook as an investor. Fidelity holds significant shares of Facebook as an investor. JP Morgan has doubled down on their commitments to DEI and all of the efforts that they have, put forth. Are they going to double down by holding Meta accountable in its actions? Those, as the shareholders and thinking about the profit, is a source and a place of accountability for folks when we know that, and especially in the absence of regulations, we know that these corporations are not going to do the right thing just because it is the right thing to do. And so thinking about the creation of consequences, raising the stakes, exposing, the hypocrisies, the ways in which corporations in particular, want to profit off of Black people while like simultaneously, creating the conditions of harm for Black people as well, and not allowing that to be the case, in campaigns that expose and push and drive people to action, making demands heard, telling the stories of harm, raising the profile on these issues.
Advocacy and policy, that's your drivers?
Yes, so we leverage campaigns, the power of people, the power of narrative to hold both government actors and corporate power brokers accountable.
Unfortunately, ladies, you all got heated. We got heated on Brooklyn Savvy. But unfortunately, this is all the time we have for this episode. But Portia, thank you. I think you're going to have to come back again.
Yes.
I mean, you are a font of information, very good information.
Oh, that's kind. I had a great time.
And we will see you next time on Brooklyn Savvy.